David Miller was once a name that echoed through the skyscrapers of Chicago's financial district. Now, he's a man wandering in silence, ruined by betrayal, forgotten by the world. But on a rainy afternoon in the West Loop, he spots an 8-year-old girl selling origami on the sidewalk, her eyes sharp, her words too wise for her age. Her name is Lily, and from the moment she scribbles an advanced equation on a napkin over lunch, David realizes she's no ordinary child. She's a math prodigy, homeless, alone, and hiding a past shaped by survival. He decides to adopt her. But when Lily uncovers fraud buried deep in high-frequency algorithms, the stakes rise fast. David's past collides with Lily's gift in a race to expose corruption and reclaim honor. Can they outmaneuver the very forces that ruined his life? This is more than a comeback. It's redemption through genius, love, and quiet resilience. Subscribe now and witness a story that proves even broken lives can build miracles. The air was crisp that morning, the kind of quiet chill that clings to grief. Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale, California, rested under a pale blue sky, untouched by the city's usual chaos. The neatly trimmed hedges, solemn marble stones, and whispering trees created a sanctuary for remembrance, but also a mirror for regret. Robert Hayes adjusted the collar of his black wool coat as he stepped out of his Bentley. At 63, the billionaire defense contractor wore grief like a finely pressed suit, presentable, restrained, and heavy in the shoulders. Every year on this date, he came alone to visit the son he had failed to understand until it was too late. Matthew Hayes had been his only child, a brilliant, tender-hearted young man with a quiet fire and a calling far different from his father's. Where Robert engineered weapons, Matt wrote poetry. Where Robert met with generals, Matt sat with terminally ill children. They had always moved in different orbits. It wasn't until pancreatic cancer took Matt at just 27 that Robert realized how vast the space between them had become. He walked the path he knew by heart, past the memorial angel, beneath the old oak, to the grave marked by understated granite. Matthew James Hayes. 1992, 2019. To light even one small candle. Robert paused. But something was different today. A boy, no more than 6 or 7, was kneeling at the headstone, a toy truck resting carefully by the granite edge. He didn't look up. He simply whispered, "Hi, Matt. I brought your favorite one today, the red one, like the one you said you always wanted as a kid." Robert stood still, heart caught somewhere between confusion and a strange, unfamiliar ache. The boy's hoodie was 2 sizes too large, his sneakers scuffed beyond recognition. He had placed a hand over the toy as if shielding it from the wind. Then, quietly, the boy added, "I miss you. I miss how you used to laugh when I made the truck do flips." A moment passed before Robert cleared his throat gently. "Did you know my son?" The boy looked up, startled but not afraid. His eyes were wide and earnest. "You're Mr. Hayes?" Robert nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm Matt's father." The boy stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, and offered his hand. "I'm Jake." Robert took it, small, cold, firm. Jake pointed to the truck. "He gave this to me when I was in the hospital. He said I should hold it when I felt scared." Robert felt the world tilt. "You were sick?" Jake nodded. "Leukemia. I met Matt at Children's Hospital. He used to visit every Tuesday, dressed up sometimes like a silly superhero, brought cookies and Legos. Sometimes he just sat with us. You didn't know?" Robert's lips parted, but no words came. He looked down at the toy truck, battered from play but handled with reverence, and then back at the boy. "No, I didn't know." Jake's expression softened. He never talked about himself much, but he said he had a dad who was always busy. He didn't say it mean or anything, just like a fact. Robert closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Each word from this child landed like a stone in his gut. "Do you still go to the hospital?" he asked gently. Jake shook his head. "Not since last year. My treatment's ended. I'm better now. We live with my mom in Burbank. Sometimes I come here when I miss him." Robert hesitated. "Your mother, does she know you're here?" Jake shrugged. "She works early shifts. I told her I was visiting a friend. This is kind of like our secret place." Robert felt a wave of something unfamiliar, something between protectiveness and guilt. "Jake," he said softly, "would you and your mom have lunch with me sometime? I'd like to hear more about Matt." Jake smiled. It was a small, crooked smile, but sincere. "Okay, but only if you let me show you the truck tricks he taught me." Robert chuckled. Actually chuckled, for the first time in what felt like years. "It's a deal." As they stood together in the late morning sun, Robert Hayes realized he had not come to mourn his son alone. He had come to meet a piece of Matthew's heart, alive, resilient, and offering a chance at something he thought was lost forever: redemption. And so, with careful hands, he picked up the truck, placed it gently on the stone, and whispered, "Thank you, son." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the towering glass windows of Robert Hayes's office, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of downtown Los Angeles far below. He stood motionless, holding the same toy truck Jake had brought to the cemetery, its red paint chipped, its wheels worn but still turning. He hadn't slept, not really. Instead, he had spent the night staring at a picture of Matthew, the only framed one he kept on his desk. In it, Matt was 16, caught mid-laugh during a rare father-son hiking trip in Big Sur. Robert had never known until now just how hollow that smile had been to him, because the real man, the man that little boy at the grave knew, was a stranger who left behind echoes of kindness his own father had never seen. Robert pressed the intercom. "Karen, cancel everything today." His assistant's voice crackled back in disbelief. "Sir? Even the defense committee call?" "Yes, everything." He hung up, grabbed the photo, and quietly left the office. By noon, Robert stood outside the white stone facade of the Children's Hospital Los Angeles, unsure why he felt nervous. This was the same institution where he had donated millions for new surgical wings and cancer research. His name was on the brass donor plaque near the entrance. But this was different. This visit wasn't about money or reputation. It was about truth. He stepped inside, greeted by soft beeping monitors and the low murmur of medical staff. After a brief exchange with the front desk, a nurse escorted him to a quiet hallway off the pediatric oncology wing. "She'll be right with you, Mr. Hayes," the nurse said gently, leaving him in a waiting room painted in cheerful yellows and blues. 5 minutes later, a tall woman in her mid-40s entered, wearing lavender scrubs and a look of cautious recognition. "Mr. Hayes?" "Yes," he nodded, extending a hand. "You must be Cheryl. I was told you knew my son." Cheryl's face softened instantly. Knew him? Matthew Hayes changed this place. Robert sat down slowly, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know about the work he did here. I didn't know about Jake." Cheryl smiled, then gestured to a manila folder she carried. Matt didn't do it for recognition. He came every week for over a year. He sat with the kids no one visited. He read books to the ones too sick to play, and when he knew he wouldn't beat the cancer, he left this. She handed Robert the folder with reverence. Inside were photos. Matthew, in a ridiculous superhero cape, crouched next to beaming kids. Another showed him holding a Lego castle with Jake, who grinned despite the IV taped to his arm. There were letters, too. Notes he'd written to the children, to their parents, and one addressed simply, "To be opened only if I don't make it." Robert froze. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Dear Jake," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm not around anymore. But I want you to know something. You made me braver. You reminded me that even in pain, joy is possible. That life, no matter how unfair, still deserves love and laughter." It continued for 2 pages, personal, poetic, tender. By the end, Robert could no longer hold back the tears. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know he had this much love in him." Cheryl placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He got it from somewhere, Mr. Hayes, whether you ever showed it or not." Robert looked up at her, eyes hollow. "He paid for Jake's treatment, didn't he?" She nodded. "Quietly. Signed everything under Anonymous Angel. We knew who it was, but we respected his wishes." He closed the folder slowly, then looked out the window where children in wheelchairs were being wheeled into the sunlight. One boy was holding a balloon shaped like a star. "I want to help," Robert said suddenly, "but not with money. I want to be there, with the kids, with Jake." Cheryl smiled warmly. "Then start by coming to Story Hour tomorrow. That's where Matt always sat." Robert nodded, the decision firming in his chest like armor. He'd built war machines for most of his life, but now, in this quiet hallway, Robert Hayes realized his son had been building something far more powerful all along: hope. And it was time he did the same. The next day, just before noon, Robert Hayes stood in the back of the Children's Hospital reading room. It was smaller than he expected, lined with rainbow-colored beanbags and hand-painted murals of fairy tale forests and animals. The soft hum of a lullaby played through a ceiling speaker, and the scent of crayons and antiseptic filled the air. He'd traded his tailored suit for dark jeans and a simple sweater, an outfit he hadn't worn since before he built missiles, before congressional hearings and global defense contracts. Now, those layers of armor felt foolish. What shielded him before had no place in this room. On a plush rug in the center, children gathered, most in hospital gowns, some with bald heads beneath beanies, others gripping teddy bears or IV poles. Among them was Jake, the boy from the cemetery, curled up beside a book with a blue truck on the cover. His eyes brightened when he saw Robert. Robert raised a hand in an awkward wave, then approached slowly, unsure if he belonged. Before he could second-guess himself, Cheryl appeared beside him with a gentle smile. "They're ready," she said softly, handing him a book. Robert looked at the title, The Little Prince. "I remember this," he said, his voice catching. "I used to read it to Matthew when he was little." "Then it's the perfect place to begin," Cheryl replied. He nodded and knelt beside Jake, the pages trembling slightly in his hands as he opened the book. The children quieted, turning toward him. He could feel their expectant eyes, each one carrying stories he would never fully understand. But for this moment, they trusted him to tell one. "In the desert," he began, his voice low but steady, "I met a little prince." As he read, something shifted in him. Jake leaned against his arm, eyes fixed on the illustrations. A girl with a pink headscarf giggled at the part about the baobab trees. Another boy raised his hand when Robert mispronounced geographer, and when he paused, uncertain whether to explain the fox's lesson about love and responsibility, it was Jake who whispered, "Keep going." By the end of the book, Robert's voice was hoarse and the room was still. "That was better than TV," one of the kids said. The others nodded in agreement. Cheryl stepped forward. "Can we thank Mr. Hayes?" The children clapped. Jake grinned, his front tooth missing. "You sound like Matt when you read." Robert blinked fast. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." After the kids were wheeled back to their rooms or escorted by nurses, Jake lingered behind. "Do you think you'll come again?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Robert hesitated for only a second. "Every week," he promised. "Maybe more." Jake nodded, then fished something from his hoodie pocket. It was a hand-drawn picture of a red truck, slightly bent at the edges. "I made this for Matt, but I think he'd want you to have it now." Robert took the picture reverently, as though it were a medal of honor. Later that afternoon, Robert sat across from his general counsel, David Liu, in his private conference room overlooking downtown L.A. The folder of Matthew's letters and the child's drawing lay between them. "I want to start a foundation," Robert said plainly, "in Matt's name, focused on pediatric oncology support, family housing, education, all of it." David raised a brow. "That's admirable, sir, but this isn't just a donation. You'd be stepping into a whole new role." "I know," Robert said, "and I'm not doing it to clean my conscience. I'm doing it because Matt didn't get to finish what he started." David studied his boss for a long moment. "And what about Hayes Enterprises? The board will panic." "They'll adjust," Robert replied, his tone resolute. "It's time we stop profiting off destruction and start building something that heals." There was silence. Then David slowly nodded. "Then we'll make it happen." That night, Robert sat alone in his penthouse with a single desk lamp illuminating the photograph of Matt in his superhero cape. He placed Jake's drawing beside it, then whispered aloud, "You were so much more than I ever knew, son, but I'm learning." The city below buzzed with its usual noise, but inside that quiet room, something new had begun. A father stepping into the shoes of the boy who taught him how to love. The following morning, Robert Hayes arrived at the hospital again, this time not with a book, but with a question heavy on his chest. He hadn't slept well. The image of Jake's eyes, his quiet bravery, and that drawing of the red truck haunted him through the night. He kept wondering what else Matthew had done without him knowing, what other pieces of his son's legacy were still hidden, waiting to be discovered. Cheryl met him in the hallway, her face lighting up in mild surprise. "You're early." Robert smiled faintly. "Couldn't stay away." She nodded knowingly and gestured toward a quiet office at the end of the corridor. "There's something you should see." Inside, the walls were lined with filing cabinets and corkboards filled with photos, staff events, fundraisers, children's drawings. On the desk sat a thin blue folder labeled Hayes, Matthew, confidential in block letters. Cheryl slid it toward him. "When Matt passed, he left this with the staff. Told us to give it to someone he trusted, when the time was right." Robert's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were letters, some written to the children he'd visited, some addressed only to someone who needs hope, and one envelope simply labeled Dad. He froze. "I haven't read it," Cheryl said quietly. "That's yours." Robert nodded, his throat tightening as he opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten in Matthew's uneven scrawl, strong but youthful, as though he was trying to hold back emotion, even in ink. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I don't know if you ever figured out what I was doing here, or why I didn't tell you, but I need you to know something. I didn't come here to die. I came to live the parts of life that mattered. These kids, they're brave in ways we can't imagine. They laugh when they should cry. They share when they have nothing. I gave them what I could: time, attention, and love, things I didn't always know how to give you. But it wasn't because I didn't care. I just didn't know how to talk to a man who never stopped working. Maybe this place will help you find what I did. Something real, something that lasts. Love, Matt." Robert stared at the page, his vision blurring with tears. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, not in anger, not in grief, but in reverent mourning, for a son who had found truth long before his father did. "I'd like to read one of these," Robert said, voice hoarse, motioning toward the other letters. "To the children." Cheryl smiled gently. They'd like that. That afternoon, in the same softly lit reading room, Robert read aloud Matthew's letter titled, "To Someone Who Needs Hope." It was simple and profound, a story about a boy who was scared but chose to smile anyway. It spoke of courage found in small acts, of superheroes in hospital gowns. The children listened in quiet reverence. Jake sat closest to Robert, his small hands gripping the arm of the beanbag tightly. When he finished, there was a stillness. Then Jake whispered, "That sounded like something Matt would say." Robert nodded, then asked the children, "Do any of you want to write back?" There was a pause, then a flurry of nods. Back in the hospital's volunteer center, Cheryl handed Robert a binder with information about volunteer requirements, hospital policy, and scheduling. But she also slid over something else, a printed invoice marked "Paid in Full." "What's this?" he asked. "Jake's file," she said. "His treatment was paid anonymously. We only recently connected the donor account to a foundation your son had set up with a private trust. He used your name to fund it, but never told anyone." Robert was stunned. "He paid for Jake's care?" he asked. Cheryl nodded, and 6 others, quietly, deliberately. Robert leaned back, overwhelmed. "He became the man I never taught him to be." "No," Cheryl corrected him softly. "He became the man he hoped you could be." That night, Robert walked into the penthouse and bypassed the elevator's private access panel. He walked into his son's old room, which hadn't been touched in years, left like a museum to a boy lost too soon. He flipped on the light and stared at the walls, movie posters, photos, trophies collecting dust. He sat on the bed and whispered into the silence, "I see you now, son. I see everything you tried to show me." He picked up a photo of them at a baseball game. Matt, on his shoulders, both laughing, years before the distance had grown between them. It was time to stop hiding behind money and influence. Time to live with intention. The next morning, Robert walked into his boardroom with purpose. The same men and women who once deferred to his power now saw something different in his eyes. Something quieter, but more commanding. "We're making a change," he said, setting Matthew's trust documents on the table. "The Hayes Foundation isn't a side project. It's our future." The next board meeting was supposed to be routine: quarterly financials, shareholder updates, projections for the upcoming year. But as Robert Hayes entered the marble-lined conference room at Hayes Enterprises' downtown Los Angeles headquarters, the energy shifted. He didn't wear his usual armor of tailored arrogance. No tie, no sharp pinstripes, just a navy sweater, sleeves rolled at the wrists, and a stillness in his posture that made people sit up straighter. Seated at the long table was Bradley Vance, his late son's godfather and the company's longtime CFO. Trim, silver-haired, and perpetually smug, Bradley greeted Robert with a thin smile. "You look rested." "I am," Robert replied simply, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get started." The meeting began as expected. Charts projected on glass, numbers reported with practiced ease. But, halfway through, Bradley's tone changed. "There's one matter we need to address," he said, flipping a folder onto the table. "It concerns the recent reallocation of funds to the so-called Hayes Foundation." Robert raised an eyebrow. "So-called?" Bradley's voice was measured but laced with venom. "You've diverted nearly $15 million from unallocated reserves into a privately administered foundation, without prior board approval. I'm well within my rights as CEO to allocate discretionary spending," Robert replied calmly, "especially toward philanthropic efforts outlined in our mission statement." Bradley didn't back down. "That may be, but there's concern that this sudden shift, especially following your emotional experiences, may be less about philanthropy and more about optics. A PR stunt, designed to salvage your reputation after, well, years of absence." A heavy silence fell across the room. Robert sat still, his fingers steepled before him. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. You think this is about PR? Bradley shrugged. People change when they grieve. I'm merely suggesting we apply checks and balances before more assets are moved without oversight. Robert's voice lowered, dangerous and deliberate. Do you think my son's life, his work, his letters, the children he held while they died, is a PR stunt? Bradley flinched but recovered quickly. That's not what I said. No, but it's what you meant. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Robert pulled out a single sheet of paper from his folder and placed it in front of Bradley. This is a directive. As of today, the Hayes Foundation is an official subsidiary of this company. Fully transparent, auditable, and yes, funded. Bradley scoffed. And what exactly will it do? Robert met his gaze. What Matthew did. Help children. Bring light where there is only dark, and remind the world that corporations aren't just machines for profit, they're vessels for purpose. Bradley leaned back, arms crossed. And if the shareholders don't see the value, then we find new shareholders, Robert said coldly. Silence again, until a soft clap broke it. It came from Angela Lim, a senior board member who rarely spoke. I lost my nephew to leukemia 2 years ago. He spent his final weeks at Children's Hospital. I've seen what that kind of care means. I support Mr. Hayes' directive. One by one, hands were raised. A vote. A show of support. Bradley remained seated, silent and fuming. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Robert left without another word, but he noticed Bradley linger, fingers furiously typing something on his phone. That evening, as Robert arrived back at his penthouse, his phone buzzed with a message from Laura Adams, Jake's mother. Hi, Mr. Hayes. I think someone's trying to dig into Jake's medical history. I got a strange call today pretending to be from insurance. Be careful. Robert's blood ran cold. He dialed his head of security. We might have a problem. I need surveillance logs pulled. Today's calls to and from Bradley Vance's office. He paused, then added, Also, check for any data access attempts on the Foundation files. Understood. As the call ended, Robert looked out over the city lights. Somewhere down there, Jake was sleeping. Unaware. Innocent. Protected. For now. But Robert had seen this before. Men like Bradley didn't confront. They sabotaged. They whispered. They forged. They betrayed from behind curtains, not across tables. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about legacy. And no one, not even an old friend, was going to smear the name of the boy who had reminded Robert Hayes how to live. The next morning, the air inside Robert Hayes' penthouse felt strangely thick, like the quiet before a storm. He hadn't slept much. He'd spent most of the night combing through old emails, internal audit reports, and Foundation access logs. And there it was. At 11:42 p.m., someone with administrator credentials, used only by executive-level staff, had attempted to access the private patient files uploaded by the Foundation's partner hospitals. An alert had been triggered. But what chilled Robert to the bone wasn't just the breach. It was the username attached to it. Vance, admin, 4. Bradley, Robert muttered bitterly, the name like ash in his mouth. His phone rang. It was Laura Adams again, her voice breathless and tight. There's a man parked outside Jake's school. He didn't come in, just sat in a black SUV with the tinted windows. I'll handle it, Robert said sharply. Keep Jake inside. Don't let him out of your sight. After ending the call, Robert didn't bother with a driver. He took his own car, heart pounding as he drove across town. The moment he arrived at Sage Creek Elementary, the SUV was gone. But it wasn't the absence that frightened him. It was the message it sent. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. They wanted Robert to know it. At home that evening, he sat across from Laura at his kitchen table. Jake was curled up on the couch, drawing something quietly, humming to himself. The sight of him, so small, so unaware, tore at Robert's already fraying composure. "I don't know who that man was," Laura whispered, "but it wasn't some random creep. He had a badge on the dash. Fake or not, he knew how to look official." Robert's voice was low, but each word was weighted with fury. "Bradley's trying to make it look like the Foundation mishandled patient data. If he can discredit the charity, he can discredit me, and maybe shut this whole thing down before I expose him." Laura stared at him. "Why would he go this far?" "Because he knows I know what he's done." She didn't ask what. The truth felt dangerous just to speak aloud. Robert stood, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. This was in Matthew's desk at the hospital. He left it for the Foundation director. Inside were photographs, letters, hand-drawn cards from patients. One, in particular, stood out, a folded piece of paper in a child's handwriting that read, "Thank you, Matt. You made the monsters less scary." There was a thumb drive taped to the inside flap. "I hadn't looked at it yet," Robert said quietly, almost reverently. "I didn't want to break whatever part of him still feels alive." He took the drive to his study. Laura followed. The screen flickered, and a video file began to play. It was Matthew, shot in a hospital corridor. He looked pale, thinner than Robert remembered, but his eyes were clear and his voice steady. "If you're seeing this, it means Dad finally decided to show up for something that matters," he said with a sad smile. "I left these files for the Foundation, not just the sweet stuff, but the real stuff. What we saw, what we learned, who tried to stop us." Robert's breath caught. Matthew's tone changed. "Dad, someone's using hospital donations to launder money. I don't have proof yet, just patterns. One of them is someone you know, someone close, and if they find out what I've found, they'll bury it." Laura put a hand over her mouth. "I love you," Matthew added, voice cracking now. "Even if you didn't always show up, I always hoped one day you'd finish what I started." The screen went dark. Robert sat frozen. Then he turned to Laura, voice raw. "I think he knew Bradley was stealing from the hospital." Laura nodded slowly. "And now, Bradley's trying to cover it up by making you look like the one exploiting sick children." Robert clenched his jaw. "Not anymore." He copied the video file to a secure drive and called his legal counsel. "We need to take this public," he said. "Bradley Vance used my son's death as a smokescreen for his crimes. He crossed a line." His attorney paused. "Are you ready for the fallout, Robert? This could drag your family name through hell." "I buried my son in silence," Robert said solemnly, "but I will not let him be forgotten in lies." Across the room, Jake stood holding a picture he'd drawn, a crude sketch of himself and Robert flying in the sky, both of them wearing superhero capes. "I drew us fighting the bad guys," Jake said proudly. Robert knelt beside him, voice breaking. "That's exactly what we're going to do, kiddo." That evening, the marble columns of the Chicago Board of Trade gleamed like silent sentinels under the grand chandelier's glow. A hush rippled through the crowd of bankers, brokers, and benefactors gathered for the Michael Walker Charitable Foundation's annual gala. Tables draped in ivory linen showcased gleaming silver platters of hors d'oeuvres. Strings of violins hummed softly along the balcony above. Yet, beneath this polished veneer, tension coiled like a sleeping serpent. Michael adjusted his bow tie in the mirrored foyer, heart pounding with both pride and dread. Since taking Emma under his wing, he'd poured every ounce of his reputation and resources into the foundation, funding research, hosting events, and advocating for pediatric patients. Tonight was beyond symbolic. It was a declaration. He was back in Chicago, not as the aloof billionaire of headlines, but as a man with purpose and family. He spotted Emma near the refreshments table, her small frame illuminated by soft lamplight. She wore a simple navy dress, no designer label, but she carried herself with quiet confidence far beyond her 6 years. At her side stood Margaret Walker, Michael's sister and chair of the foundation board. Margaret had reluctantly supported Emma's presence tonight, though Michael suspected her motivations were mixed. "Ready?" Michael leaned close, managing a warm smile despite his fluttering nerves. Emma nodded, eyes bright. "I'm ready." Together they moved into the ballroom where tables formed concentric circles around a raised dais. Michael's attorney whispered that Eric Barnes, his former partner turned adversary, would be here. Barnes, now CEO of Barnes & County, had attended politely last year but declined Michael's invitation this time. Michael had insisted. If reconciliation was impossible, tonight he'd force a public confrontation. As the orchestra shifted to a stately waltz, Michael mounted the dais to applause. He cleared his throat and began in measured tones. "Thank you all for coming to support our most important project, giving sick children hope." His voice tightened as he looked down at Emma, her small hand gripping a folded speech card he'd given her for moral support. He swallowed, then continued resolutely, "This year, we've expanded scholarships, funded new clinical trials, and—" A ripple ran through the audience when Emma stepped beside him, tugging gently at his sleeve. Michael paused, then offered the microphone. "Go ahead, Emma." For a heartbeat, the hushed crowd met her tiny figure with surprise. Then the microphone light flickered on. "Being sick alone," she began softly, "is scarier than being sick together." Her voice, clear, honest, unwavering, cut through the glossy pretense. Eyes misted across tables of executives and politicians. Michael felt Margaret's sharp gaze, but Emma didn't falter. She glanced up at him, drawing courage from his encouraging nod. "Sometimes," Emma went on, "the best medicine is a friend who cares." A lone violinist faltered on her bow, and then polite applause swelled into genuine ovation. Michael fought tears. He knew Emma had no script, no practiced lines, just the pure truth of a child whose life he'd changed. In the back of the room, a tall figure stepped forward. Eric Barnes, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo. Barnes's smile was tight, practiced, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of admiration amid the surprise. Barnes approached the dais, clapping slowly, deliberately. "Bravo, Emma," he said smoothly. His voice carried across the hall, silencing the orchestra. "You remind us all how we got into this business in the first place, not for profit, but for people." Michael's jaw clenched, uncertain if Barnes' tone was genuine or another thinly veiled barb. Margaret stiffened beside him, stepping protectively closer to Emma. Barnes raised a hand in peace. "Michael, your foundation's work has undeniably improved children's lives. I'm pleased to support it." The room exhaled in relief. A flurry of shouts rose as servers advanced with champagne flutes. Michael accepted one from a passing waiter, offering Emma a sparkling grape juice. She grinned, then raised her glass in a toast to the silent crowd. Margaret leaned in, voice brusque yet strangely warm. "Well done, brother. You and Emma." Michael nodded, eyes never leaving Barnes. When the CEO finally extended his hand, Michael grasped it firmly. "Thank you, Eric. It means more coming from you." "No, thank you," Barnes replied quietly, tone laden with unspoken meaning, "for making me remember why we're here." As Barnes melted back into the crowd, cameras flashed at the news table, reporters scribbled furiously, and whispers of Emma's impromptu speech rippled through social media in real time. Michael exhaled a shaky breath. Against the marble pillars, Margaret gave Emma a quick hug, distant warmth in her eyes. "Well done," she whispered, voice just above a murmur. Emma's face lit up, and Michael felt a swell of hope. Tonight, they'd claimed victory, not just in public hearts, but in their own. The conflict with Barnes had cracked, revealing a shared humanity. Yet, Michael knew the struggle wasn't over. The seeds of corporate war remained. Still, as he guided Emma down from the dais, he felt something new. Unyielding faith that together they could weather whatever storm lay ahead. That night, the apartment felt unusually hushed, the city's distant hum muffled by fatigue and anticipation. David Miller sat at his makeshift home office, an IKEA desk strewn with half-drunk mugs of coffee, crumpled napkins scrawled with equations, and Lily's origami creations perched like silent sentinels at the edge. The glow of his laptop illuminated Lily's determined face as she peered over his shoulder. "She's right," he murmured, tracing a column of numbers on her napkin. "Barnes's algorithm. It doesn't add up." His tone was reverent, as if admitting a long-buried truth. Lily nodded, fingers tapping the desk anxiously. "He said he optimized transaction timing to boost liquidity," she explained softly, voice steady despite her trembling hands. "But the code I ran shows deliberate delays, almost like he's hiding money in those transaction windows." David closed his eyes, heart hammering with guilt and awe. "You saw that?" he asked, amazed. "You uncovered it?" Her small shoulders squared. "I've been studying his public filings, cross-referencing timestamps. There's a pattern, money disappearing into shell accounts seconds before he claims peak performance." He leaned closer to the screen. Together they opened a new repository on GitHub, Project Monarch. David keyed in a descriptive readme.md. Lily watched, curiosity and pride mingling in her young eyes. "Project Monarch," she whispered. "Because we're tracking the king of this circus?" David chuckled dryly. "Exactly." He paused before his next keystroke. "Then, let's follow the trail." For the next hour, the pair pored over code, CSV exports, and banking metadata. Lily's small fingers flew over the keyboard as she crafted Python scripts to flag anomalous transfers. David, once the titan of finance, scrubbed log files with the same meticulous zeal he'd used to pitch hedge fund strategies. As the clock edged past midnight, Lily's script pinged an alert. A cluster of microtransactions to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, timed precisely 2 seconds before Barnes reported quarterly earnings. David felt a cold surge of vindication and dread. "These shell accounts," Lily said, voice barely above a whisper, "they belong to a front company, Brightwave Holdings. Registration address is a P.O. box." David's throat tightened. "We need to trace Brightwave's real owner." He rubbed his eyes, thinking of Rachel Hayes, who'd first vouched for Lily's brilliance, and the social worker's stunned expression when David insisted on guardianship. "Tomorrow," he decided, "we call Emily Chen. She's the only one who can help us peel back corporate anonymity." Lily nodded, yawning despite herself. "I'm tired," she admitted, stifling a yawn. "But I want to keep going." David offered a rare, genuine smile. He held out a hand. "You've earned rest, partner." She grasped it firmly, a handshake sealing their partnership, tender and fierce. They closed their laptops and headed to bed, the weight of their discovery settling around them. But sleep came fitfully for David, his mind racing through scenarios. Evidence to federal investigators, the risk of tipping Barnes off, the safety of Lily, his daughter in all but the law's eyes, should their covert operation be exposed. By dawn, the air was crisp and sharp. David brewed fresh coffee while Lily tapped out a text to Rachel. "Project Monarch activated. Need Emily's number." Seconds later, her phone chimed with Emily Chen's contact info. At breakfast, Lily quietly shared her plans. "We need a secure environment, Dad. Not my apartment, and definitely not the shelter." David nodded, thinking of Emily's loft in River North, wired like a data center. His fingers hovered over the phone. "I'll call her now." Later that morning, David sat across from Emily Chen in her minimalist, glass-walled office. She'd been David's lead systems engineer before Barnes's betrayal. Now, she listened with rapt attention as he laid out the findings. Barnes's transaction anomalies, the Cayman shell accounts, the timestamp manipulations. Emily's brows knitted together, then lifted in respect. "This is solid," she said decisively, voice rich with technical authority. "Your 8-year-old friend has a sharp mind." She turned to Lily, offering a warm smile. "Ever considered coding professionally?" Lily flushed with pride. Emily refocused. "Right. Security first. We'll set up a virtual sandbox on my servers. David, you need to gather corroborating bank statements and public records. Lily, you'll refine your anomaly detector. And I'll anonymize our access logs so Barnes can't trace us." David exhaled in relief. In Emily's capable hands, Project Monarch felt real, more than a desperate hope. "Thank you," he said, voice husky with gratitude. "I owe you both." Emily waved off the praise. "Let's just keep Lily safe and stop Barnes before he buries the evidence." As David and Lily left Emily's office, hand in hand, the skyline stretched before them, ominous and lit with possibility. Between them, a pact had been forged. A bankrupt ex-executive, a homeless math prodigy, and a loyal engineer, united by justice and heart. Unbeknownst to them, far across town, Eric Barnes was already fielding whispers of financial irregularities. The game was on, and with Lily's algorithm and David's resolve, Project Monarch stood ready to expose the Empire's darkest secrets. The air in Emily Chen's secure server room thrummed with quiet intensity as David Miller and Lily huddled around rows of glowing monitors. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through high windows, casting geometric patterns across the polished concrete floor. Emily, arms folded and eyes sharp, watched Lily type the final command. Trace funds. Brightwave Holdings. A cascade of code scrolled rapidly downward, hash-tagged entries lighting up in green and red. Lily's cheeks flushed with excitement and a hint of anxiety. "We did it," she breathed, reading aloud the output. 5.2 million USD transferred. Pan Asia Investments. Timestamp 11/23/07/Q3. David felt a surge of vindication. The first real proof that Barnes's collapse of Miller Barnes Capital had been more than mere market turbulence. "Pan Asia," he murmured, recalling that Barnes had vehemently denied any Asian partnerships. That account never showed up in public filings. He watched Lily nod seriously, her nimble fingers preparing the next query. Emily leaned forward. "That shell company is a phantom. No executives, no physical office. But these transfers, microsecond delays, round numbers, those are intentional obfuscations. They point directly to hidden pockets of stolen capital." Lily's blue eyes sparkled as her code flagged a sub-branch. Pan Asia, Bloomleaf Trust, Cayman U. "Look at the recursive loop," she pointed urgently. "He's laundering money through Bloomleaf to avoid KYC checks, and as soon as it hits Cayman, it's gone, elusive as smoke." David's heart pounded. The man who humiliated him in boardrooms and orchestrated his ruin was, in fact, embezzling millions. "We need to pull the timeline," he said, voice tight. "Q3 collapse. He timed it to coincide with large withdrawals. That's not coincidence. That's betrayal." Emily keyed in spreadsheets showing the quarter's trading volumes, profit and loss statements, and exchange rates. "See here," she said, circling a line of figures when the markets dipped dramatically. He pivoted off these moments, funneling nearly 1.3 million each week into Bloomleaf. And your firm's reported losses aligned perfectly. Barnes engineered both your downfall and his windfall. A tense silence fell as Lily processed the gravity of their discovery. "He stole from our employees' pensions," she said softly, voice trembling with righteous anger. "From my shelter. From every person who trusted him." David swallowed hard, anger and sorrow warring in his chest. "We have to decide how far we go. Exposing this will bring down Barnes Enterprises, but it could also trigger a financial panic. We need incontrovertible evidence, chain of custody proof, legal counsel ready. Emily nodded decisively. I'll encrypt everything, distribute copies to Rachel Hayes and legal. We'll need a controlled leak to the SEC. But first, a sudden beep interrupted her, and a map of server pings flashed on a corner monitor. Unauthorized access attempt. Emily's brows knitted tightly. Someone's probing our firewall. They've escalated privileges. Lily's hand froze over the keyboard. Is Barnes onto us? David reacted instantly, swiping Lily's chair aside and standing between her and the terminal. No, stay back. Emily, isolate the node. Now. As Emily executed a rapid series of commands, they heard the building's intercom crackle. Attention! Unauthorized activity detected. Security teams en route. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, the fluorescent lights flickering. David's protective instincts surged. He'd promised to keep Lily safe at all costs. Emily slammed her palm on the kill switch, severing external connections. He's trying to wipe our traces, she said, voice steely. We've got seconds before he escalates further. David grabbed the encrypted USB drive Emily handed him. Take this, he instructed Lily gently. Go with her to Rachel's office. Do not return here until I reach you. Lily's heart pounded, but she nodded resolutely, stuffing the drive into her backpack. Be careful, she whispered to David, her determination shining through tears. David's gaze hardened. I won't let him hurt you. He watched Lily and Emily slip out of the back entrance, their footsteps echoing down the stairwell. Alone, David returned to the monitors. He opened a hidden folder and began downloading raw database logs, transaction IDs, time-stamped metadata, Bloomleaf's shell company registrations. Typing feverishly, he assembled a dossier. Barnes Betrayal, Exhibit A. The dossier would be sent simultaneously to Rachel, federal investigators, and Margaret Walker at Miller Family Trust, key allies who could deliver indictments. Sirens approached, distant but growing louder. David's chest tightened with adrenaline. He believed wholeheartedly in Project Monarch, in Lily's brilliance, and in the justice they were about to serve. But he also knew he was playing a dangerous game, exposing a financial titan at the peak of his power. As security personnel stormed the building, David smiled grimly. He clicked Send, unleashing their bombshell evidence across multiple jurisdictions. In that moment, he felt a profound shift. The wounded ex-executive had become a crusader, defending not only his own reputation, but the vulnerable lives Barnes had exploited. Locking down the final server, David whispered into the empty room, You won't silence us. Not anymore. Outside, chaos simmered, but inside him, a calm resolve took root. With Lily's mind and Emily's expertise, Project Monarch would unmask Barnes's stolen millions and reclaim everything that had been taken from them. Late morning sunlight slanted through the blinds of David Miller's home office, illuminating a scattering of financial reports and Lily's meticulous algorithm printouts. David sat behind his massive mahogany desk, eyes bloodshot from an all-nighter spent orchestrating the dossier's distribution. His phone pinged insistently, a secure message from Emily Chen. Barnes Enterprises account, frozen. SEC and FBI served. Rachel under protective custody. Meet at my lab in 15. Within minutes, David arrived at Emily's sleek lab beneath a repurposed warehouse in Chicago's tech district. Emily stood beside a towering bank of monitors, her expression grave yet determined. Beside her, Rachel Hayes, pale but resolute, clutched a thermal mug of coffee, her social worker badge glinting like a talisman. David, Rachel exhaled tremulously, voice wavering. I'm sorry. They blackmailed me with my past mistake, threatened to expose me if I didn't feed them Lily's location. I never wanted to hurt her. David's chest constricted with sympathy. You saved her countless times, Rachel. This was their doing. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You did right by coming forward. Emily precisely tapped a key, and a holographic timeline flickered into view. Barnes's shell transactions, Rachel's coerced emails, Lily's recorded shelter logs. We've got the proof, Emily said crisply. Each illicit transfer tagged, each threat documented. This isn't just financial fraud, it's criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. David inhaled slowly, relief and sorrow mingling. Then Barnes's final act, when he broke into your apartment, was an attempt to destroy all evidence. Rachel nodded fiercely. He tried to intimidate me. But then Lily's morning call rang through. She'd called to check on me, sweetly asking, "Is Mr. David okay?" That courage reminded me why I stay in this fight. At that, Emily activated another screen. Live footage from the gala banquet hall where Barnes was hosting a celebratory dinner for major shareholders. Barnes stood at the podium, glass raised smugly. "To new horizons," he toasted, oblivious that at that very moment, federal agents surrounded the venue's perimeter, armed with sealed search warrants. David's jaw tightened. Good, let's finish this. Emily guided them into the surveillance wing, where cameras monitored every corner of the hall. David leaned close, breathing James's whispered play-by-play. He's just announced a new AI venture, claims to leverage blockchain analytics. That algorithm Lily flagged is what he's calling Project Nebula. He's spinning it as innovation. Rachel's eyes brimmed. He's shamelessly using the same tainted code. David's resolve hardened. Then it's time he faced accountability. Emily swiftly encrypted a secure RTSP link to the agents outside. "Watch this," she said, toggling to a segmented clip. Barnes's victory speech overlaid with Lily's code annotation, revealing the algorithm's hidden money laundering subroutine. Agents shared the feed. Commotion stirred inside the hall as black-suited officers flooded the banquet room. Barnes's visage crumpled in shock and fury. He dropped the microphone. Cries of confusion rippled through the guests. Security personnel hustled to contain the situation, but the agents, backed by David's evidence, made clear they held valid warrants. The gala erupted into stunned silence, punctuated by urgent footsteps and shouted orders. Back in Emily's lab, David watched Barnes's arrest on screen. He felt a bittersweet triumph. Years of ambition and status undone in a single evening. "It's over," he murmured, voice choked with relief. "He can't harm Lily again." Rachel exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Thank you for everything." Emily turned to David, determination in her gaze. "There's one more thing. The Miller-Barnes venture credit lines, those pensions Barnes diverted, we traced the final link to a dormant trust account he set up in his mother's name. The board of Miller Family Trust can reclaim it." David nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "Then I'll restore every penny to the employees' pension funds and to Lily's shelter." Outside, sirens wailed as Barnes was led away in cuffs. Lily's recorded voice, "Math is my compass, even in darkness," played softly on David's phone, a reminder of why they fought. He slid an arm around Emily and Rachel as they watched the live feed. "We did this together," he said quietly, pride and gratitude infusing every word. Rachel managed a small smile. "No one believed we could, but Lily did." Emily glanced at the blinking monitors. Project Monarch succeeded, but David, this is just the beginning. Now we rebuild. David straightened his shoulders, resolve blazing. Then we'll build a better future. One equation, one life at a time. As they stood united, the Chicago skyline beyond Emily's warehouse windows seemed to shimmer with promise. The storm of betrayal had passed. What remained was the hard-won clarity of justice and the new alliances forged in courage. and at the heart of it all, a remarkable girl whose prodigious mind and tender spirit had healed more than broken algorithms. The cavernous ballroom of Chicago's McCormick Place hummed with eager anticipation. The Illinois Investment Conference was in full swing. Rows of polished chairs faced a raised dais, where banners proclaimed integrity in innovation. At precisely 10:00 a.m., David Miller stood center stage, Lily poised beside him. He glanced at the sea of suits and ties before inhaling deeply, determination igniting his chest. "Good morning," he began, voice steady yet warmly resonant. "I'm David Miller, CEO of Monarch Capital." Polite applause rippled through the audience. David's heart pounded as memories of Barnes's betrayal and the sleepless nights fueled by Lily's courage flashed through his mind. He looked down at her, her sharp blue eyes bright with quiet pride, and found the strength to continue. "Today," he declared softly, "I stand not just as a corporate leader, but as a father." The room stilled. Curiosity etched on every face. Murmurs rose in the back rows. David's pulse surged. This was more than a speech. It was an unveiling of his greatest transformation. "2 months ago," he said, voice tinged with vulnerability, "I was broken, bankrupt in spirit. I'd lost my partner, my reputation, and, most of all, my faith in myself." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Then I met Lily." He waved gently toward his daughter, who gave a small, proud smile. "Lily taught me that compassion isn't a weakness. It's the very foundation of trust, whether in life or business." A hush fell. David pressed on. "I discovered Lily selling origami animals on a rain-slicked street corner, calculating probabilities of foot traffic to survive. I brought her into my life, and she saved me. And together, we exposed a conspiracy that threatened not only our company but the pensions of hundreds of hard-working employees." The stomach-churning moment he exposed Barnes had made national headlines, but here, under the conference's spotlight, felt more intimate, more redemptive. David's voice strengthened, passion shimmering through each carefully chosen word. "Integrity begins with accountability. I know many of you felt betrayed when our stock dipped. You wondered if Monarch Capital had lost its moral compass. Today, I rebuild that compass." He pressed a button on the lectern. Behind him, a projection filled the screen. Images of Lily's algorithm-led investigation overlaid with graphs showing pension funds restored in full. He let the visuals speak before continuing more quietly. "I've restructured my schedule, stepping away from 80-hour weeks to spend my afternoons with Lily, nurturing her brilliance and guiding her dreams." Light laughter drifted through the audience, then a wave of heartfelt applause. David allowed himself a brief, grateful smile. "Effective immediately," he announced, "Monarch Capital will dedicate 5% of annual profits to the Miller Foundation, established by—" He caught Lily's eye as she mouthed, "David Miller," to support programs for gifted children from underprivileged backgrounds. The slide shifted to teenagers in science labs, art studios, and mentoring sessions. Because genius should never be a luxury. The crowd erupted in enthusiastic cheers. David's gaze softened as he concluded, "My daughter and I invite you to join us, whether as mentors, donors, or partners, in transforming potential into purpose. Together, we can ensure no child is ever left to navigate life's uncertainties alone." He stepped back, heart soaring, as the ballroom rose in a standing ovation. At the front row, Emily Chen wiped a tear. Rachel Hayes beamed, pride radiating from her. As the applause crescendoed, Lily slipped off stage and embraced her father's leg. David crouched, gathering her in a protective hug, his voice thick with emotion. "We did this, together." She nodded into his shirt, muffled but unmistakably joyous. Moments later, backstage, David and Lily shared a private smile. Reporters and investors streamed past, congratulating him. One respected fund manager extended his hand. "David, that speech was extraordinary. I'm honored to invest in the foundation." David clasped his hand firmly, heart swelling. "Thank you. Lily's story deserves to inspire every boardroom, every classroom." Outside the hall, news vans rolled in. Cameras flashed as David emerged, Lily at his side. He discreetly slipped Lily's hand into his pocket, an unspoken promise that she would never face the world alone again. Then, facing the media scrum, he spoke crisply. "This isn't just a business pivot, it's a family commitment." Reporters scribbled furiously. Backstage, one last time, Lily tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we watch the news together?" He nodded. "Absolutely." Hand in hand, they stepped into the green room and settled on a couch. As the TV illuminated their faces, the anchor's voice proclaimed headlines. "Monarch Capital's bold ethical turn. CEO's daughter inspires new philanthropy. Love like Lily, a story of justice and hope." David felt tears prick his eyes, tears of relief, pride, and love. Lily leaned against him and whispered, "You're my hero, Dad." He kissed her forehead, voice husky. "No, sweetheart, you're mine." In that quiet, triumphant moment, David Miller realized the most powerful boardroom isn't behind a desk. It's in the heart of his little girl, whose relentless faith had reshaped his world, and now, the future of thousands touched by their shared journey. David stepped off the platform beneath the conference's grand chandelier, heart still thumping from the thunderous applause. Beside him, Lily squeezed his hand, her small frame steadied by his reassuring presence. As he descended the steps, Margaret Vance, freshly ousted and surrounded by stiff-faced legal counsel, approached with furious determination. "David Miller," she hissed, her voice quivering with rancor. "You've gone too far. You'll regret making this personal." He met her gaze calmly, voice clipped yet unwavering. "Margaret, I'm done negotiating ethics. You offered me half the stolen assets to keep your scheme quiet. I refused. Now I've already distributed copies of the algorithm, the offshore accounts, and your clandestine board minutes to the SEC, the FBI, and every major financial press outlet." He watched her pale lips press together as word of Lily's vindication spread through the crowd, whispers morphing into shouts. Moments later, Lily tugged at David's sleeve. "Dad, look." On the conference's massive video screens, rolling headlines blazed. Monarch Capital whistleblower saves pensions. FBI raids Vance's offices. Investor confidence soars with Miller's integrity. David's eyes brimmed with pride as delegates, once doubtful, now gave them standing ovations. Later that night, beneath Chicago's glittering skyline, David and Lily walked along the Riverwalk. He paused, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "You know," he said softly, voice thick with emotion, "I thought this crusade was about justice, but it's more than that. You taught me how to stand up, even when it scares me." Lily's eyes shone. "I did learn math so I could fight thieves." She giggled, then grew solemn. "But I also learned that people matter more than numbers." He knelt to her level, folding her into a gentle embrace. "Exactly." 3 weeks later, federal agents escorted Margaret Vance in handcuffs from her lavish Lakeshore Drive penthouse. Her resignation letter, previously drafted in defiance, lay discarded on her desk. Meanwhile, Monarch Capital's stock had rebounded higher than ever, buoyed by investor loyalty and a surge of philanthropic goodwill toward the newly launched Miller Foundation. In the hushed hush of dawn at the federal courthouse, reporters swarmed David and Lily as they arrived for the final hearing to dissolve Barnes's shell companies. Lily's powdered blue dress and David's crisp navy suit made an unlikely yet instantly iconic tableau, father and daughter united by courage. A photographer captured Lily grinning shyly as she whispered, "We did it, Dad." Then reporters pressed, "Lily, how does it feel to be both a whistleblower and a hero?" She straightened bravely. "It feels like math finally makes sense." 1 year later, the Miller Family Institute for Pediatric Research opened its doors in a restored Chicago brownstone. Lab benches glowed under soft LEDs, art studios burst with color, and a library brimmed with books on coding, robotics, and creative writing. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew scientists, philanthropists, and families whose children had once felt invisible. David watched as Lily delivered the inaugural address, clear, confident, and heartfelt. "This institute," she said, voice steady, "is dedicated to every child with a dream unfairly dismissed. Here, we solve problems, mathematical, medical, or personal, together." Applause erupted, David's chest swelling with gratitude. Backstage, Emily Chen embraced him. "You did it, David. You rebuilt not just a company, but your soul." He smiled, tears glistening. "We did it." That evening, David and Lily returned to their West Jackson corner, the same street where their journey began. They paused before an origami fox Lily had pressed into concrete as a marker of hope. Lily knelt and placed fresh flowers at its base. David stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She looked up. "Dad, you thought you were rescuing me." He knelt beside her. "But you saved me." And under the city lights, father and daughter stood, no longer broken by corporate betrayal or childhood abandonment, but bound together in a partnership of love, justice, and unbreakable trust. 2 months had passed since the grand opening of the Miller Family Institute, but its heartbeat was just beginning to find rhythm. On a chilly Sunday morning, David found himself standing in the entry hall of the newly constructed second wing, a state-of-the-art AI and ethics research lab named the Lily Wing. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the polished floors with warmth. Lily's hand was wrapped gently around his, her eyes wide with pride as she looked around the space named in her honor. "Do you think other kids like me will feel safe here?" she asked quietly. David bent down to her level, his voice tender. "They won't just feel safe, Lily. They'll feel seen, because you showed them they matter." She leaned into him with a soft smile, and he wrapped his arms around her. Her slight weight felt like the heaviest gift life had given him, one that reshaped everything. But outside these walls, the world hadn't forgotten the chaos Margaret Vance had unleashed. That very afternoon, 60 Minutes aired an exclusive exposé on the corporate scandal and whistleblower saga, spotlighting Lily's algorithm and how she'd uncovered an international fraud web. Clips showed federal raids, investor protests, and then Lily's voice, clear, factual, and unflinchingly brave. She was no longer a background prodigy. She was a national symbol of truth. By Monday morning, the Foundation's inbox was flooded with over 12,000 emails. Families asking for help, children submitting ideas, and researchers offering to collaborate. In the kitchen of their River North home, David sat with Emily Chen and Rachel Hayes. Their laptops buzzed with spreadsheets and scheduling chaos. "We're not just a foundation anymore," Emily said, sipping her 4th cup of coffee. "We're a movement." Rachel, now director of youth outreach, looked at David with a warm, measured gaze. "And movements need leaders who don't forget where they started." David glanced at the origami fox on the bookshelf, a permanent fixture now. "We won't forget," he said softly. "Not one child." As they worked, Lily entered wearing her oversized hoodie and holding a spiral-bound sketchbook. "I drew something," she said, placing it in front of them. It was a sprawling blueprint of a children's innovation summit, part science fair, part mentorship exchange. In the margins, she'd drawn little icons, stars, compasses, bridges. At the center was a phrase: small minds, big ideas, boundless futures. David stared at it, his voice caught in his throat. You just outlined our next national initiative. Rachel clapped. Emily blinked away tears. Lily tilted her head, curious. Was it good? David reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. It's genius. Just like you. 2 weeks later, in a quiet boardroom tucked inside Chicago's Adler Planetarium, chosen for its view of the stars, David faced off with Barnes one last time. Despite the federal investigation, Barnes had slithered his way into a pending acquisition deal with a foreign hedge group. They needed one signature: David's. Come on, Barnes coaxed. This is clean. Totally legal. Walk away with 8% equity and a consulting role. David leaned back, arms folded, calm but unwavering. I watched you gamble with people's pensions, Eric. I watched you destroy lives. And now you're asking me to co-sign your next sleight of hand? Barnes smirked. You've gone soft, Miller. One little girl and suddenly you've got morals? David's eyes darkened. That little girl saved more lives with one line of code than you ever will. She's the reason I won't make this deal, and she's the reason I sleep at night. As he stood and walked out, Barnes called after him, You'll regret this. David didn't turn around. Because he wouldn't. That night, Lily fell asleep on the couch with her head in his lap, fingers still clutching the corner of her sketchbook. David looked down at her, gently brushing a curl behind her ear. Tomorrow would bring noise, requests, attention, maybe another scandal. But tonight was just a father and a daughter, bound by a quiet kind of love forged in adversity. He reached for a blanket and covered her gently, then whispered into the dim room, We're just getting started. The wind off Lake Michigan carried the sweet chill of spring as David walked slowly beside Lily down West Jackson Boulevard. The city buzzed with new energy. Sunlight warmed the sidewalk, trees bloomed in soft green, and laughter drifted from cafes and open windows. But David barely noticed the noise. His focus was on the tiny hand holding his. They stopped at the same spot where it had all begun. The street corner where she had once sat in the cold, surrounded by origami animals, her eyes sharp, her world small but unfathomably brave. Lily looked up at him now, older by only a year, but changed. Her hair was longer, her shoulders taller, her smile was freer, as if she no longer needed to brace for loss. "Can we stay a minute?" she asked, her voice soft, reverent. David nodded. They sat on the bench near the corner, where a plaque had recently been installed, her idea. It read, "From this corner, hope unfolded. May all who pass believe in second chances." L.M. David read it again, letting the words soak into his chest like sunlight. "You've changed the world, Lily." She shook her head. "We did. Together." He let that sit between them, not just as sentiment, but as truth. That afternoon, the Miller Family Foundation hosted its first Innovation Gala at Navy Pier. Instead of celebrities and billionaires, the guest list was filled with foster kids, teen coders, single moms, community teachers, and social workers. People who had built hope from scraps. Lily stood center stage, wearing a navy blazer over a sequined t-shirt and white sneakers. She held a remote in one hand, a small origami fox tucked into her pocket. Behind her, a digital presentation lit up. Project Origami, teaching code through art to children in shelters. "I used to think paper was just something to fold," she began, her voice clear. "But now I know it's also something to write futures on." The crowd leaned in. She showed how origami was helping other kids understand logic, symmetry, even algorithms. But more importantly, it was giving them control, beauty, and purpose. For those who felt disposable, she was showing them they could create. David stood in the back, arms crossed over his chest, emotion threatening to undo him. Rachel nudged him with a knowing smile. "You look like a dad watching his kid win the Nobel Prize." "Feels pretty close," he whispered. Later, as twilight fell over the pier, Lily pulled David aside. "I have something for you," she said, holding out a small, square box. Inside was a bronze tie clip. Engraved with delicate precision were 4 words. "She saved me first." David couldn't speak. His throat closed as tears blurred his vision. Lily smiled. "I heard what you said last year, at the first press conference, when they asked why you adopted me." He chuckled softly. "Guess I'm not very original." She shook her head. "You were honest. That matters more." He took her hand, looking at the skyline glowing with soft light. "You know, Lily, people used to ask me what I'd do if I could rebuild my legacy." "And?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes full. "Now, I just tell them. I'm living it." That night, back home, Lily brushed her teeth while humming a soft tune. David sat at the dining table scrolling through the hundreds of messages sent to the foundation after the gala. Kids writing from shelters in Phoenix, mothers from Detroit, a group of young girls from Baltimore who had started their own origami club. Hope, it turned out, was contagious. Lily emerged in her pajamas, a blanket draped over her shoulders like a superhero cape. "Can I stay up a little?" David grinned. "Only if we finish that book." She curled beside him on the couch, handing him The Little Prince, the same copy they'd read on that first night. He opened to their bookmarked page. "And when your sorrow is comforted, time soothes all sorrows, you will be content that you have known me." Lily yawned and whispered, "That part always makes me cry a little." David kissed the top of her head. "Me too." In the hallway, a framed photo hung beside the coat rack. It showed a man in a suit, kneeling beside a little girl holding an origami fox. Behind them, the faded street sign of West Jackson Boulevard. It was more than a memory. It was a beginning. And, from that corner, love, quiet, fierce, anxiety, fierce and unstoppable, had unfolded into everything.